Okay, so what I want to do today is to present a large, we call it observatory. So this Quad Climate-Ecological Observatory for Arctic Tundra. So it started as a project nearly 20 years ago. So we got funding a few years back to develop the research infrastructure for this observatory from now, more or less, because we are going to open the center next week. So we hope, of course, these days it's always hard to have any trust in kind of long-term financing, but we hope that this observatory will, in a way, secure this long-term funding. So this is really teamwork. So the observatory is led by Rolf Ims, who is in the next office next to mine, and then by plenty of other people. So I will try to always say who is doing what, but I put some of the names here. So it's really important to remember, as is written also in the title, it's a platform that is used by many scientists from different institutions. So in the university where I worked, so the Arctic University of Norway, but also other institutions like the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research, or NINA, or the Norwegian Polar Institute, or the Norwegian Meteorological Institute, especially for in this case, the weather and climate part. And then for the different forecasting part that I will present, there have been, or there are really different peoples that have been involved and that are leading these different parts. So here I'm more kind of presenting teamwork than my own work, even if I have, in a way, participated to most of these things. So first, so that you know where we are in the world, because perhaps you're not familiar with Northern Norway. So Tromsø, where I work, where I sit right now, is in 70 degrees north. So it's quite far north. It's really north of the Arctic Circle. So right now it's the dark period. We have no sun for 2 months. On the two study area that I will discuss, and I will focus mostly on one, what is called Varanger here on the map. They are part of the subarctic Arctic region. So Svalbard is really the high Arctic, and Varanger is the low Arctic. So that's where you are in the world, and that's what I will discuss. In a way, that's also why the observatory is focusing on Arctic Tundra. That's because specific component of this kind of system in the Arctic. So what I will present today, so don't worry if you cannot read anyway the slide here. The goal here is in fact just to show that it is complicated and there are many boxes. It doesn't really matter necessarily what you have in the boxes. The point is that you have many boxes on many in a way lines or arrows between the boxes. So our approach to forecasting here is what we call food web based. And this is one approach to research or understanding ecosystems. We don't say that this is the right approach. It depends on your objectives, on your questions. If you are interested, of course, in carbon fluxes, using a food web approach might not be. It's probably not a very good approach. But for our case, or in a way systems, we have a relatively strong species focus, either because in terms of management, for example, in the middle of the figure here, you have the ptarmigan. It's a species which is harvested. And for managers, it's important to understand the dynamics of the ptarmigan so that they can decide on the hunting quota. So they have to make decisions about these kind of quotas. And as I will explain a bit later, forecasting can be really an important tool to decide on improve how these quota are decided. So this kind of food web approach is nothing original. As I've written, you can go back to Elton on even before that. Looking at this kind of food web has been done in ecology for decades, even centuries. But it's really useful if you want to assess some of these human impacts. It can then include explicitly some of these ecosystem services, typically harvested species. That's a typical good, even if I don't like the term, but that's really what you can think of them of ecosystem services. On Arctic ecosystems are relatively well known. We are, of course, not the only one to look at this kind of food web. I saw, for example, Nils Martin Schmidt was here, and they are doing the similar things in Zackenberg on Greenland. On our colleague in Canada at Bylot Island are also doing similar things. So the food webs don't look the same. There are some differences, of course, but the approach is often quite similar. So the problem with this complicated figure, with many arrows, many boxes, and so on, is that it's impossible, or at least we don't have the data, to put everything in a big statistical model. That is, we cannot have a kind of big forecasting model for the whole ecosystem. So what we did, so in the different parts of this observatory, is to split this complicated food web in what Bob Payne called, more than 40 years ago, a food web module. That is, you look at the important interactions in this food web, and then you focus on what you think or what you need in terms of forecast. What are the important speeches, for example, for managers? So, for example, we have a module focusing on ptarmigan, grouse, which is important for management and which is also important for the system. There are, for example, species that are dependent on the ptarmigan, the gyrfalcon. The gyrfalcon, for example, is a grouse specialist. So understanding the dynamics of the ptarmigan will be important for understanding what is happening with the gyrfalcon. And then ptarmigan will also be affected by other species. So what this, you will say, short-term forecasting is really, that's what I am a bit coordinating in this observatory. And it's also an important way to link the different modules, because the different models that we developed in terms of forecasting, on short-term forecasting, they have to be coherent. That is, you cannot start to have, in a way, each model developing its own tradition. So there is a need for having some kind of cross-cutting part that is really ensuring that we do something in a consistent way. And I would say I'm kind of gray eminence, sitting in the back and really trying to coordinate this so that we have some kind of, at the end, something coherent for the whole observatory and not just each module. An important aspect of this forecasting is that we develop the models together with the stakeholders. On the stakeholders, they can be, they are of course the managers. They are clearly important stakeholders. They're the ones making the decision about, for example, harvesting of ptarmigan or conservation of Arctic fox and so on. But there are also other stakeholders that are, have a stake in this, like, for example, bird conservation organizations or NGOs. That really must be part, in a way, of this process. And we try for example, for the ptarmigan that has been really successful, we involve the stakeholders at all stages of the process. That is not just in a way making the model and then presenting the results and then discussing the results with them. They are in part of the process from the start. That is, we develop the models on the hypothesis with them. They come up, as I will show, with their own hypothesis, their in a way own understanding of the system, on which we have this kind of fancy word that is used today, this co-modeling, in the sense that we try really to cooperate in developing these kind of models. One important part also is to agree with them from, in a way, before we run the analysis on what kind of data, on how the data will be used. That is, sometimes you can have a problem when you develop these kind of models, when suddenly people say, but you cannot use this data because of this and that, often because the data don't lead to the conclusions that people were hoping for. So you have to agree in a way on the data also beforehand. So there is the kind of no coming back later on just for some specific reasons. Then all the way to the, of course, the interpretation on discussion of the results. So we have reference groups for the different modules on the different forecasting part, where really this process is happening every year. We're discussing, say, changing the models, improving the models, changing the data, and so on, but with really very regular on high frequency discussion. So now some examples. So I will start with the ptarmigan or grouse model. So for people who know grouse, here in fact there is a kind of slight, not really error, but the picture is of a willow grouse. On what you have on the figure is rock or alpine, the rock ptarmigan. So we made a small error in terms of species. The model is mostly about willow grouse. It's, as I say, it's ecosystem based on these trophic interactions. So just to give an example of these trophic interactions, one important predictor of the ptarmigan is the small rodents. The one you have with not very nice drawing, but it's a lemming. It's supposed to be a lemming that you have on the bottom, in the middle, a bit on the left. On the reason that small rodents have an effect of ptarmigan is not because they eat ptarmigan or because ptarmigan eat small rodents, is because of predation. Because you have predators like red fox or some birds of prey. For example, the gyrfalcon again. The gyrfalcon, for example, could prefer ptarmigan, but they also eat small rodents. Red fox is perhaps a better example because red fox eat preferentially small rodents, but when small rodents are gone and when they crash, then they will predate on the ptarmigan. So this kind of arrow could reflect indirect interactions, but they are trophic based. They are really based, for example, on predation. And it's the same thing on the top where you have ungulates. In our case, it's mostly the semi-domestic reindeer. When there is a harsh winter with a high mortality of reindeer, so a lot of carcasses, that's a lot of food for scavengers like red fox or crows or ravens, so corvids. And they are important predators on the nests, on nestlings of ptarmigan. So again, you have this kind of indirect effect because of predation. So then, of course, you have also the effect of management, and that is the harvesting rate. So what is the percentage of ptarmigan that is harvested every year? And then some effects of weather, what we call here the environmental change. So that could be through when the winter starts. The reason for that is that ptarmigan become white in the winter. So you have this kind of change in the color, which means that depending on when the snow comes, they will have a match or mismatch. That is, white ptarmigan on snow-free terrain, that's easy to spot. On the same thing with a gray or brown ptarmigan on snow, that's also easy to spot for predators. Temperature and precipitation also can have an effect during the nesting on a nestling stage, because especially the small chicks are very sensitive to bad weather. If you have a really rainy or cold weather in July, when you have the small chicks, that can have really negative consequences. So this reflects, in a way, the complex life cycle of the ptarmigan, and also when we collect data. So this is a kind of complex figure. I will just go through it relatively quickly. So the data that we have on ptarmigan, they are based on line transect surveys that are done in August, so at the end of the summer. The reindeer carrion, as I explained, is this indirect effect through the scavengers. And then we have data that are collected during the winter when you have this mortality of reindeer. The rodent abundance is based on surveys that we do using especially capture-recapture of small mammals, especially voles. And this is something we do in end of June, beginning of July, and also in September. But because the effect of small rodents is mostly through predation on nests on small chicks of ptarmigan, it's only the data in June and July that are relevant. That is the data in the late spring, early summer. The data in August are not really relevant. Even if we have the data, we don't use them because they don't reflect the expected impact on the ptarmigan. So we have data on vegetation change. The willow grouse, as the name indicates, is dependent on willows. So we have also data on possible change that we have observed with especially this kind of willow thickets, this change in vegetation structure. Then we have data on ptarmigan hunting. Norwegian hunters are quite reliable in the sense that they provide really data on how many grouse, the ptarmigan, they have shot during the hunting season, which is mostly during the fall. And then, as I said, we have these weather variables, the temperature precipitation in July, and the winter start that can happen anytime between early October to beginning of December. So that's the structure of the data. And then we put so everything in a model. So this is, in a way, the estimates that we got from the model using model structure that I will explain right after. So just to give some information about the data that we use, this is the region for which we make short-term forecast. Is the county of Finnmark, is the northernmost county in Norway. So Varanger, the place I was showing at the beginning, is all the way to the north, but here we use a larger area because that's what the managers want. So it's about 50,000 square kilometers. So it's a relatively large, of course, everything depends on scale. If you talk to Canadians, they will say it's a small place. If you talk to people in Switzerland, they will say it's a huge area. It's larger than Switzerland. So it depends, of course, of your, in a way, reference point. But we make a prediction for the whole region. More specifically, we split the region in three, what we call west, east, and interior. So that's the state at what we are now. And we have line transects for the ptarmigan. So that is the estimate of ptarmigan densities. They are indicated in dark blue here on the figure that cover more or less the whole region. It's far from perfect. It's not a random sample at all. but it's relatively good coverage of the whole region. I think most people would be relatively happy with this kind of coverage. We used for the weather gridded data. This is relatively, in fact, difficult in our region because nearly all the weather stations that were available before we started our project were along the coast because people live along the coast. And there is very few people living in the mountains or in the interior. So most of the stations were along the coast. And basically what we have learned today with the new weather stations that we have established in the project is that the gridded data that are available are used, for example, by the Norwegian Meteorological Institute, they are not reliable when you want to assess what is happening in the interior. So this is something that we are really working on now, is really to get better gridded data. On the bottom, you have, for example, this gridded data for different periods showing where you can have climate. Well, so here I'm talking climate because it's 10 years. It's kind of closer to climate. Are a region that are favorable for tree growth. They show very nice patterns. So they are very nice maps. But we know now, because we have tested this with new weather stations, that you cannot really trust them. They look nice, but they are not as good as we would like them to be. The worst, in a way, example we have of this kind of gridded data that are not good at all is the gridded data for snow deaths that are based on a snow model for Norway, it's a model that works very well in South Norway. But if we use them in this part of Norway, so for where we work for this observatory, in fact, the correlation between the modeled snow depth and the observed snow depth we have tens of stations where we measure the snow depth. The correlation between the two is more or less zero. It's not that it's not significant, it's the estimate of the correlation is zero. So basically, for example, for snow depth, the model data, the gridded data are completely useless. So this is also, I will come back to this, a bit of a warning when people use this kind of gridded data without really a proper check of their validity on the ground. So there are other sources of data for which we have good information. The small rodents, which is really a critical part of understanding ptarmigan dynamics. And this is because that is Rolf Ims and myself, we have been trapping small rodents. It's live trapping, as you can see from the picture. It's a nice gray-sided vole, fully alive. We have been doing this live trapping for now more than 25 years. And we started in 98, in fact. So here we just show part of the data. And we have been doing this over a very long transect, about 200 kilometers, that we can really use to assess the dynamics of these rodents. They are quite synchronous along this transect, which means that basically we can really have a good index of the rodent abundance over the whole region based on this kind of data. The model that we use is a hierarchical model. That is, it's account for the uncertainty associated with the line transects. It's a distance sampling. So we estimate density based on a classical, in a way, distance sampling model. So it's a state space model, to use the fancy word. We use then predictor variables at different scales. Some of them are local at the scale of each line transect, like the weather data. Some are more regional, like the small mammals, for which we use more kind of average value for the abundance. And then what we do is a prediction based on the model I have shown, that is 1 year ahead. That is, we 1 year in the sense that we make a prediction in July based on the ptarmigan abundance estimated the year before in August. And we make the prediction in July so that the managers can decide on the quotas in July, so that the hunters can, in a way, adjust their behavior during August before the hunting starts in September. So for the managers, it's important that you don't do it too late. That is, you have, in a way, to warn the hunters, for example, that, okay, sorry, this year the ptarmigan population is very low. So the hunting quota will be very low. So it's no point coming to Finnmark to hunt. So in the first paper we published on this in 2020, we used kind of internal validation. That is, we used the data up to 2016, and we just used the data we had to see if we could predict 1 year ahead. So that's what you have in the figure on the bottom right. So we have different models. You have the models, for example, that is based on the full food web with all these trophic interactions. But we had, for example, a model with only ptarmigan. That is, if you had only time series on ptarmigan, and you try to predict based on this, no trophic interaction, no environment, no trophic web. What you can see from this figure is that the food web model is, in general, really working better than the other models. For example, the ptarmigan model is usually quite bad. So what we have done since then is so since 2021, so after we had published the paper in 2020, we have made this kind of prediction every July, so 2021 up to last year, 2024. Basically, I'm not showing, so because we are trying to readjust now some of the predictions. Basically, our predictions hit the observed densities very well. For example, this year we predicted a decrease in the ptarmigan population, and the population decreased quite significantly. And the managers had decreased the quota following our prediction. Not everyone was happy because, of course, when you decrease the quota, people may, in a way, react to it. But because, in fact, that fitted quite well with the observations, it has been really a kind of success so far. So the managers are really quite happy about, in a way, this predictive model. They really think that it's very useful in really improving the management, because before they were really flying blind when they were establishing this quota. It was more this kind of remorse. I've seen a lot of ptarmigan. I've seen very few ptarmigan. And that was it. Now they have a quantitative tool, and it has worked now 4 years in a row. So it's kind of quite fine. So further developments, I will spend less time on the other aspect. This one was kind of the most, in a way, where we have the best achievement in terms of really having done this for many years and having really good interactions with the managers. So what is still missing here is that we would like to have something which would be adaptive management in real term. That is, if you want to do adaptive management, it means that you need to be able to predict the consequences of different management actions, and then choosing the best management actions according to your management objective. So we still don't have this kind of predictive model through predicting the effect of different management actions. So this is really something we are working on that we hope to have in place within 1 or 2 years. And it implies also that we know what are the management objectives. Of course, that's also a difficult question, so exactly what the managers want. And technically, there are also different aspects that we need to improve, is accounting for the spatial structure of the different sampling designs, and accounting for the measurement error of the predictors, because this measurement error has really different components, which is hard to include really in this kind of state space model. So we have done the same thing with the ptarmigan, and this is the rock ptarmigan in that case, on Svalbard. So Svalbard is the high Arctic archipelago that is under the jurisdiction of Norway. So the same kind of approach has been developed in this case. On the same way, we have a rather successful predictive model. So nothing that different here. Is more or less the same framework, but we try to apply this framework in a systematic way. So now I will just show quickly two more examples of this kind of short-term forecast that we have. One is for the lesser white-fronted goose. It's the smallest species of goose that you have in Europe, and it's highly endangered. In fact, the only population left in Europe is in North Norway, so in this part of Norway where we work. So that's the only population left in Europe. There is some population further east in Russia and Siberia, but at least in all parts of Europe, that's the only population left. Here again, there is a food web approach. Predation is important, and especially predation by red fox. So, and then you have this indirect effect with the small rodents on the reindeer carcasses, again, as I explained before for the ptarmigan. So it's a bit of the same structure. So one of the first things we did was to assess the effect of a management action that was done after 2008, which was to cull red fox population. So it was a simple before-after comparison, no forecasting here, but it's just to, in a way, frame the question, how much we understand. And basically, the conclusion of this is that the red fox culling that has been going on for more than 10 years. So in the paper, we analyzed only 9 years, but it was now it has been continuing. Basically, the red fox culling had no impact on the goose. So in some way, you could conclude that all these red foxes were culled for nothing, at least in terms of the goose management. What was important is really the rodent abundance. What we have in red here, that's the conclusion of this first analysis, is really red fox culling, it doesn't help. So the management action is of no great use, but the dynamics are driven by this rodent abundance. So based on this, we developed a simple predictive model based on the rodent abundance that you have on the top. And it's mainly one species. So it's me again with the same vole. It's the trapping we have done since 98. What I show here is the vole abundance in the spring, which again, that's the important part for the goose because of predation. Predation occurs in June, July. And based on this, we have a model predicting, for example, here, the number of clutches for the lesser white-fronted goose. On what we published so recently, it's in Norwegian because it's important for us to, in a way, have something that is read by the local managers and the people really involved in this species. But what we have published is a prediction for 2024 that was made in May, so before we had the data. So what you have in blue is a comparison between the data that we observed last summer on the prediction. And then we have also predicted what we expect for 2025. So I would say you can come back in 6 months from now and see, okay, if we have made, in a way, good short-term predictions for the goose on the voles. So further developments for this model. We want to improve the predictive model for the small rodents because right now it's based on a very simple autoregressive model of the spring abundance. For example, it doesn't account for the seasonal dynamics from spring to fall. And we know from papers that we have published that this seasonal aspect is important, but we don't, for example, include it in the predictive model. And then the same thing for the goose. The predictive model for the goose, for the number of clutches, the robotic success, does not account for the age structure. And age structure is important because, for example, 1-year-old geese usually are not very good at breeding. So last example, and then I will conclude, is a predictive model we have for this time not a vertebrate, but moss. So 2 species of moss that have huge impact on the main forest ecosystem that we have in North Norway, which is a birch forest ecosystem. The picture that you have here on the top right is a picture taken in August. The trees don't look very healthy, as you can see, because they have been killed by an outbreak of this moss species. And it's 2 species in this case. They are called the winter moss and the autumnal moss. So Operophthera brumata and Epirita autumnata, so 2 relatively similar species, but with somewhat different ecologies. In this case, what we want to predict is, again, a short-term forecast of this moss species. On short-term means 1 or 2 years, that can be used by forest managers to predict, for example, forest death or this kind of huge defoliation, so that they can adjust, for example, harvesting strategies depending on really what happens to the birch forest. For example, when you expect really a huge death or a huge defoliation, you might say, okay, better to harvest this part of the forest since anyway it's going to be killed by moss species. So something important here is that we have 2 moss species, as I say, and this Epirita and this Operophthera, so the winter moss and the autumnal moss, and they are not synchronous, and we don't really understand why. But what is in a way occurring and what is known, it's nothing new here, is that one species, Operophthera, is usually lagging after Epirita. So the winter moss, Operophthera, is coming after the Epirita, the autumnal moss. And that's, in fact, is why we get this forest death, this huge impact, is that instead of having a peak with just 2 years of outbreak of one moss species, you can get 3, 4, 5 years of an outbreak. And we often use this as an example of where you remote sensing using satellite is not going to help you very much, because satellites can help you documenting forest death, but I'm not aware of any satellite that can distinguish between the 2 species of moss. So this is something where you really need to have data from ground data, where you see which species is having an outbreak, on if it is 2 species or only 1 species. So what we have done in this case is to develop the short-term forecasting model based on time series that we started with also about 25 years ago, around the year 2000, on using different model structure, on especially is it useful to include the other species of moss when you want to predict the dynamic of one species of moss. So you have here one example of this kind of model prediction. As you can perhaps see, if you look, for example, at the blue, which is the arrows, so the average predictions, there are really some systematic bias in the prediction. For example, in the increase phase of the cycle, all predictions are systematically lower than what we expected, and is a bit the reverse in the decrease. That is, we are not able to predict an increase which is as fast as what we observe, and we are not able to predict a decrease which is as fast as what we observe. And we have used non-linear models, this TAR, which is this threshold autoregressive model that should account for this kind of non-linearity. But we are not yet able to predict this kind of, to correct for this kind of biases. So the next stage here is to develop, now we have a relatively good model for the moss, even if there are some biases. But we need to have the next stage, which is to develop a model for the forest damage that is that depend on the moss densities. So we have data that relate the moss densities to forest damage, but we have to in a way include this part in the final model. Okay, so conclusion. This is just kind of something I want to stress, but of course there are other aspects that you might be in a way more important for you. But the first thing is for us, it's quite important to develop the models with the stakeholders. So it's not just because sometimes say, if you want the stakeholders to accept or to trust your results, you have to do this with them. Of course, that's important, but much more important is that the models you developed are better, because the stakeholders and the managers and so on, they have their own biases. So we as scientists have our own biases. They have their own biases. And hopefully, when you, in a way, put all of this together, you get something which is, in a way, better. We say the biases are kind of canceling each other. Because you don't, in a way, put emphasis on some aspects and ignore some others. At the end, you have to put everything together and use this as for prediction. Another aspect, which I guess has been a lot discussed also in the ecological forecasting initiative and so on, is if you want to work with managers on get them to trust you, you have to have something which is long-term. The forecast is short-term, but you need to have some kind of infrastructure which is long-lived. The managers, they don't want something that will happen 3 years in a row and then gone. So you need to really be able to tell them, okay, we start now, but 10 years from now, we will still be there making the forecast and providing the forecast you need. So this is something that is absolutely needed if you want to have this kind of trust. As I said, this project was started by Rolf Inns 20 years ago, and it's still there, and it's really important that you have this really long-term perspective. Another aspect is that we believe really that these short-term forecasts have been successful because we have a huge, in a way, field effort on really high-quality data. For example, the small rodents that are really the critical part for the geese, for the ptarmigan, and so on. We are in a kind of unique position in North Norway because we have this long-term, large-scale live trapping and so on that we have been doing now for over 20 years. So this is, I think this is why we have been good. We are a bit struggling now because of some different reasons. We have to switch to low fingerprint technologies as camera traps. So it's a specific design of camera traps. It's camera traps in tunnels that are under the snow. They have some advantages, but they have also some problems. On shifting from this kind of live trapping to new technologies is going to be, for us, one of the main challenge. That is how we can, in a way, switch type of data in these forecasting models. And then, as I said, there's some climatic variables, such as snow, are really hard to get. The snow models are usually very poor, at least at a large scale. And we really need to have better, in a way, models here on better data so that we can use, in fact, snow structure efficiently. And now the last question is climate change. When I was talking here about, in a way, climatic variables, I was emphasizing the weather effect from year to year. We are looking at 1 year short-term forecast. So we are not looking at climate change. We are looking at, okay, the winter has been early. What is the consequence for the ptarmigan? On, I would say, the last 20 years, they have been relatively normal. Things have become slightly warmer, but we are still a kind of normal situation, still within the range of the variation we had before. But now we start to get really extreme events. This can really affect our models. For example, for the ptarmigan model, it seems really that in the last years, some of the weather effects are disappearing. That is, the coefficients are completely changing. They are non-stationary. Just as a last slide to conclude, these are the data from the summer, so August temperature, both for Svalbard and Varanger. And look, for example, on the left, top left. This is August temperature for one weather station on Svalbard. And you have the so in black, you have the observations from 1960. No, sorry, in blue, that's for Svalbard. You have the observations up to 2022, and then 2023, 2024. In fact, the August 24 on Svalbard, we were 5 standard deviations from the mean from 91 to 2020, what is called the normal for climatologists. So we had something which was absolutely crazy. 5 standard deviations is something you would expect 1 year out of 1 million years. So the problem really with this kind of thing is it's hard to think that all nice short-term forecasting models are going to handle this kind of extreme values very easily. We are completely outside the range of variation. And clearly, that's clearly going to be a challenge for us in terms of forecasting, is really when we have these kind of extreme values, what should we do? It was less extreme on Varanger, so on the mainland in North Norway, but we were still in 3 standard deviation from the mean. That is, 1 out of 1,000 years. So it has been really absolutely extreme, crazy years here. It raises really difficult questions in terms of trusting or forecasting models in this case. Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. I personally, I really appreciated the fact that you step-by-step explained really well how to build such co-modeling frameworks and the challenges and the rewards and even the guidelines at the end. I think it's very helpful for all of us. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions from the audience? While the questions accumulate, perhaps I can ask one. I agree with the climate change. It's going to be challenging with us ecologists, like trying to find the new interactions perhaps forming in the changes in the food web and everything. But I was actually more curious from the stakeholder side, because you said that while building these models, you are really working together with them. But with climate change, perhaps what they know will also change about their system. And I was wondering how easy will it be to convince them, perhaps for the things as we ecologists think that's going to happen with climate change. Do you have any insights about that?
Insights, I can comment. I hope it will be insights. That's up to you to judge. But no, this is a very important discussion. This is related to what is called often traditional knowledge or local knowledge, so there are different names for this. I did not present it, but one important module, one important aspect of our observatory is linked to reindeer, the semi-domesticated reindeer, which are managed by the Sami people, so indigenous people in Fennoscandia. And then there is really a lot of discussion about this traditional knowledge on how much it can be used to manage the reindeer populations. My, in a way, insight on this is that discussing when you really know these reindeer herders, when the way they trust you, they basically tell you that what is going on now is completely new. They have never experienced say the weather they experience today in terms of the winter. For example, this summer, they told us that they had to gather the reindeer for the slaughtering in the fall more than 1 month later than anything they have experienced before. Because the reindeer were in the mountains and they didn't want to go down. So they were just waiting up there, and the reindeer herders were waiting down at the coast, and nothing was happening. And they say they cannot use this kind of traditional knowledge because things are completely different now. And they feel a bit lost in this situation, because everything they know in a way it has become not completely useless, but the rivers, the rivers are not freezing. So every winter now you have hundreds of reindeer drowning in lakes or rivers because they still use the same route, but now the lakes and the rivers are not frozen.
Yeah.
And so they tell us that they need, in a way, our help to give them better prediction. And for example, they were extremely happy with the weather stations that we have built for this observatory. And the location of the weather station was decided with the reindeer herders, so that they were at, in a way, locations that were important for the reindeer movements. So again, it's it's really important here that you have a really good communication, trust with the stakeholders, and then you accept that they will decide some of the things. They will include the different parts of the models. Yeah. But it's a difficult thing because traditional knowledge is very kind of everyone say you need to account for this, but when things are changing so fast and so much, it's getting hard to use it.
I understand. Thank you. Oscar, please go ahead for your question.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Olav. It doesn't. That's my.
Sorry. Sorry.
No worries.
Hi, Olav.
Hi, Nigel.
I know you.
Yes, we know each other. It was a very nice talk. I very much enjoyed it, and I'm happy that you keep going with the COAT system and make it work. So I had a question about, or two questions actually, about the quality of forecasts. And it's a very interesting point about these, the climate change and those rapid changes, which I think I don't know how to deal with. But there are some things that are sort of within what we already tried to deal with. And so the one thing I thought about was this, how did you account for your sampling design, or did you account for your sampling design? I mean, you used state space models, so there's some hierarchical models, so there's some way of accounting for sampling in there. And the other question was about tests of the data, because from what I saw, you only tested the predictions against new data on the same time series. Did you try it against independent data somehow? Did you exclude data and fit the model to something and predict for something else? Yep.
Okay, I can start with the second question. So I have not shown it here because we are in a way readjusting some of the the way we estimate the ptarmigan densities. But we have this kind of independent assessment since we make the prediction in July before we estimate the ptarmigan densities in August.
Mm.
So you say it's independent is probably not the right word, but they are made this prediction before we have the data, so no one can say that we know what's going to happen. So the problem is in this model, I didn't want to, is what we mean by the average densities and so on. They are really, it's a hierarchical model, so they are different in a way, levels at which you can estimate these things. But the whole point is really that we make this prediction and we publish them. They are published in the Norwegian newspapers in July. Yeah, that's it. On the same thing with the goose population, we have published it in now in December. So we will see in June. So that's in a way, it's like weather forecast. You make a weather forecast for tomorrow. Let's see what happens tomorrow. So the other aspect is in terms of the sampling design. So for me, there are really two aspects. One is with respect to the response variable, which is the ptarmigan densities. In that case, it's relatively simple because it's a distance sampling, it's line transect. So we have these models that are well known. We know more or less how to do that. And we have therefore kind of relatively good in a way, knowledge of how to include this in the state space model. One aspect which I think has been mostly ignored in this kind of predictive model is how to deal with the measurement error of the predictive variables, the predictors. That is, for example, we have data on small rodents. The main source of error is not the local estimate of rodent densities. We use capture recapture, so capture mark recapture. The measurement error is extremely small. That is, the probability of capture of this gray-sided vole is about 0.9. So basically, we have a very narrow estimate of the local population. The main source of sampling error is the spatial error. And this one is much larger. On how you address this kind of sampling error when you want to predict things, for example, at a regional scale, this is something that has not been, at least in my opinion, well addressed. Same thing with gridded data, gridded climatic data. They are not, in a way, it's not the truth. They are interpolated for some, for example, precipitation in North Norway. I have shown it for snow. For snow, it's just worthless, it's 0, so we just don't use it. For precipitation, it's 0.3, 0.4. Should you use a predictor variable that is a poor proxy? I don't know. This is not something which is much discussed in the literature.
True. Thanks.
All right, please go ahead.
Super interesting. Really, in general, appreciate the insights on like kind of cautionary insights on both like the predictor side and the prediction side of things. I was curious, like with the adaptive management kind of process, if so you said that like some of the things might fall out, like in a year, like you might see that maybe some of the weather variables weren't as important as they were before. But I was wondering, in terms of like potential for new links or new processes to be like become important, how are those kind of accounted for? Or are you kind of stuck with the original model structure that you defined in the beginning, or is it possible to like update these links and interactions through the management process?
Now, that's also a very important question. We need to be adaptive on it. Adaptive management is not just that you adjust your management decisions and you assess what is optimal and so on. Is that you really also need, sometimes it's called the second order loop, where you look at the management objectives, but you also change your models. And that's why in a way, this interaction with the stakeholders, with the scientists is so important, because people are often aware of things that as scientists we don't see. On the reverse is true, that is, the managers, they don't see things that we see when we are in the field. On the same thing also with when you analyze the data, that is, you realize just suddenly that when you compare your predictions to the observations, there is some structure in a way, this error between the prediction on the observation. And then if there is a structure, that means really that something is missing. It's not just some kind of random noise. So for us, it's really very important that we have this really quick interactions between the stakeholders and the scientists and so on. So that is, you don't wait 3 years before you update things. That is, it should be at least a yearly, in a way, discussion and process. So yeah, as I said, there are really important things that we had forgotten as scientists, that the managers told us, you need to include this, guys. It's important. And we say, and it was important. They were right. On the reverse, of course, could be true. There are things that they believe is important, that, like for example, the red fox culling. No, sorry, but doesn't seem to have any effect.
That's a quick follow-up related to that, just out of curiosity, because it seems like from a management perspective, it's much easier to manage like the number of red foxes culled in a year than it is the rodent populations. How was that received? Were they unhappy with that?
No, it was interesting, because you are also in the middle of the problem. So I am a biostatistician, and I'm always telling my students, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It's it should be a basic rule. When your p-value, for example, is not significant, it doesn't mean that there is no effect. And here we were typically in this case, that is, there was no significant effect of the red fox culling. The estimate was close to 0, but the uncertainty was rather large. So there was clearly no evidence, no evidence that there was an effect, but that doesn't mean that there is evidence that there is no effect. On our colleagues, the conservation biologists, the people at BirdLife Norway, taking care of the geese, they were always stressing, but you have not shown that it has no effect. You have no evidence, but there is no evidence that there is no effect. Yeah, they were correct. So that's what I'm teaching. So I cannot tell them, no, that's wrong. But at the same time, okay, what do you do? There is no evidence that red fox culling has helped. Should you continue? There is some large ethical aspect also. So it's I have no simple answer here. It's always interesting when you are, as a statistician, just suddenly confronted to in a way, the practical consequences. What should you do? No, but I think it's for me, and of course, as I said, this is really teamwork. We discuss this a lot. As soon as you are really directly involved in the management and the decision and so on, you can think differently than when you just teach things in a more theoretical way.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for this discussion also, Nigel. Very inspiring and very helpful.